Good afternoon, fellow EDU 1107ers. My name is Alan Herring, and today I will be talking about Erikson's theory of psychosocial development. Our learning goal for today. The student will be able to summarize or explain the theory of psychosocial development. And while I'm talking about this, I have a few essential questions I'd like for you to think about. The first is, which stage or stages of the psychosocial development is the most important stage in a child's education? I'd also like for you to think about, how can understanding of psychosocial development lead to better teaching strategies? Now, just before we get started with the theory of psychosocial development, I'd like to just talk about the author for a little bit. His name is Erikson. He was born in 1902 and lived to 1994. He was a psychoanalyst who was mostly known for working with children. He married Joan Erikson in 1930. Joan would serve as his main collaborator throughout the rest of his life, and she continued his work on the theory of psychosocial development after his death in 1994. Erikson was born in Germany but came to the United States in 1933. And he wrote Childhood and Society in 1950, which was the first appearance of the theory of psychosocial development, though he would later continue his work in books published later on throughout his life. So, just a quick overview of the theory of psychosocial development. Erikson states there are 8 psychosocial stages in life. 5 of those are in adolescence, and 3 of those are after one becomes an adult. They're built on the epigenetic principle, which personality develops in a predetermined order and builds on previous stages. Each stage has a psychosocial crisis that will have a positive or negative impact on a person. Each crisis is self versus the society around them. So it's themselves versus what other people think of them or the environment around them. And successful passage through each stage will lead to the acquisition of a virtue. Now, when talking about Erikson, a lot of people bring up the Freudian influence. Erikson incorporated some Freudian ideas, including the id, ego, and superego, into his work. And looking at Freud's psychosexual development, the first 5 stages of Erikson's theory match up with milestones from Freud's psychosexual development. And I highly recommend, if you'd like to take a look at Freud's psychosexual development. However, it is not imperative for you to read that to understand Erikson's ideas. So, let's start off with, what is a crisis? A crisis is defined as internal struggle or challenge which a person must negotiate and deal with in order to grow and develop. It's contrary dispositions, as Erikson put it as himself, or syntonic, positive, and dystonic, negative. Successful movement through each crisis leads to the acquisition of basic virtues. So these are the 8 stages of psychosocial development. Just a quick note, not everyone experiences these stages at the same time, and it is possible to address a stage after it has happened developmentally. So the first stage is trust versus mistrust, and in this stage, the infant is figuring out if it's okay to trust the world, leading to the basic virtue of hope. Second stage is autonomy versus shame. So this is self-reliance versus an inhibition of self-expression, and this stage leads to the basic virtue of will. The third stage is initiative versus guilt, which leads to the virtue of purpose. The next stage is industry versus inferiority, which leads to the development of competency. The 5th stage is identity versus role confusion, and during this stage, someone will start to find themselves and be an independent person. This stage leads to what is known as fidelity. 6th is intimacy versus isolation. And this means, will a person be in a meaningful relationship or will they be alone? And of course, this one leads to love and romance. The next stage is generativity versus stagnation. And this is often seen as a person reproducing or not, but can also mean leaving a mark in the world, possibly through social causes, etc. And this leads to the virtue of care. Last is integrity or despair. At this stage, a person contemplates their life, and if they are regretful about it, Erikson claims that this is where wisdom comes from. So this is just a quick overview of the 8 stages of development. If you'd like a little bit more information, down at the bottom of the screen, there's a great animated video. I highly recommend that you take a look at it. So this leads us to the questions. Can too much of a good thing be bad? What do you think? So can too much of a good thing be bad? Erikson says yes, and I agree with him. Success consists of achieving healthy aspect ratios. This means a child must experience some of both positive and negative effects of crisis for healthy development. And the words that he uses to describe having too much positive is a maladaptation, and malignancies are described as having too many negative outcomes in crisis. So here's a quick look at some of the maladaptations and malignancies. Just take a quick second and go over it. So going back to our essential question, which stage or stages of the psychosocial development is the most important in education? So in my opinion, industry versus inferiority, followed closely by identity versus role confusion. So we'll get into a little bit more detail about those. Industry versus inferiority. This is stage 4 of psychosocial development, typically happens between the ages of 5 and 12. This is when the child begins becoming independent. During this time, teachers and peer group have a much greater influence on child. Hence, one of the reasons why this is a great time in their education. So, the child now feels the need to win approval by demonstrating specific competencies that are valued by society and begin to develop a sense of pride in their accomplishments. So, industry refers to the child engaging in a meaningful or purposeful activity. So, this is when they start to initiate projects or ideas and to collaborate or cooperate with others to produce something. So, this means they may start working together in teams, they may start playing games together, etc., etc. So, during this time, encouraging the child increases the feelings of adequacy and competency and the ability to reach goals, leading them more to the industry side of the crisis. Now, going over to the inferiority side, inferiority is just feeling useless, unable to contribute, unable to cooperate or work in a team to create something. So, restriction from teachers or parents often leads to doubt, questioning, and reluctance in abilities, and therefore they may not reach full capabilities. So, successful navigation during this stage will lead to competence. That means that they are helping to build their self-esteem during this stage in their life. That's why it is so important to help them reach their full potential during this time. So for industry versus inferiority, we have maladaptation, which is narrow virtuosity, which is being an expert at one specific thing. And this often leads to workaholic behavior and obsessive specialist behavior. So for malignancies, we have inertia, and this leads to a person being lazy, apathetic, or having no purpose. So during this stage, it is important for the child to know that they are building something or building towards something. So ways to improve education during this stage might be using differentiated instruction, learner-led instruction, and allowing for students to take ownership of their learning. And one suggestion I have for that is it might be helpful to use progress charts so they can see their progress building during the stage. So moving on to the second most important stage during a child's education is identity versus role confusion. So this is the fifth stage of psychosocial development. It happens between the ages of 12 and 18, though it actually starts at the onset of puberty. So it is possible for girls to start happening as early as 9. And just a little quote I have about this stage: the adolescent mind is essentially a mind or moratorium, a psychosocial stage between childhood and adulthood, between the morality learned by the child and the ethics to be developed by the adult. So this quote just means that they're in between being a child and being an adult, so therefore they're going to strive for more independence and work towards being themselves as an adult. And during this stage, their adolescents go through a search for a sense of self and personal identity through an intense exploration of personal values, beliefs, and goals. So this is what leads to the rebellious. So for identity, that is how a person sees themselves in relation to the world around them. So it means for them to be themselves and to share with others, and they need affirmation of how they see themselves. So for role confusion, this leads to an absence of identity. And typically the quote that's used with this is someone who doesn't know what they want to do, or someone who doesn't want to know what they do when they grow up. And so they cannot see clearly or at all who they are and how they can relate positively with their environment. So successful completion of this stage will result in the basic virtue of fidelity, or self-confidence and self-esteem to freely associate with others and be accepting of other ideals. So our maladaptation for this stage is fanaticism, or self-important or extreme behaviors. And then our malignancies are repudiation, and that leads to people being socially disconnected or cut off. Now, during this stage in the child's development, it's very important for them to be independent. So ways to improve education in this stage, once again, allowing for differentiated instruction, and especially allowing for student choices, allowing for students to be themselves within reason, and I will highly stress within reason. And then it is important to stress respecting others during this stage, because if they are all obsessed about themselves, that doesn't really lead to a positive, that could lead to a maladaptation about themselves. So, moving on to the wrap-up, our learning goal is the student will be able to summarize or explain the theory of psychosocial development. Our essential question, once again, was which stage or stages of the psychosocial development is the most important stage in a child's education, and how can understanding of the psychosocial development lead to better teaching strategies? I look forward to your discussions about this video, and if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to let me know. Thanks, guys.